A topic that I keep coming back to on this channel is a band's change in sound. I find it interesting to explore the moment when a band leaves the sound that they're known and loved for behind in order to experiment, spread their wings, attract new fans, or even push the limits of what they're capable of as a band. It's intriguing to me because there's always the question of selling out. There's always accusations of unnatural progressions in sound, and it inevitably divides the fan base. Whether you're going from pop punk to dance pop, or punk to pop punk, or pop punk to industrial butt rock, you're going to alienate some of your fans in the process. And that must be so frustrating for these bands who change their sound in earnest. You've got all your fans who moan and groan when you release an album that sounds different. Why can't they just support you in this new project and direction? Especially when you believe that your new work is your best work. This must have been what Trash Boat was feeling after the release of their 2021 record, Don't You Feel Amazing? It was met with genuine hatred, as well as some positive reception, which puts Trash Boat in a pretty sticky situation right now, because where in the world do they go from here? And Trash Boat doesn't need me to defend them, let me be clear on that. This video isn't on behalf of them. This is for people like me who think that Trash Boat have a big impact on the scene. They've been the subject of a lot of conversation online, specifically the pop punk subreddit, going from universally praised on their first two albums to largely, I don't want to say hated, but the conversation has turned sour. So with this video, I just want to explore that dialogue and inject some of my own thoughts into a conversation on one of my favorite bands in the scene, Trash Boat. This is all coming from someone who likes Don't You Feel Amazing, so please keep that in mind. Vocalist Toby Duncan was part of a plethora of different bands whose music never saw the light of day, but was a little bit all over the place in terms of genre. He would bounce between playing guitar or singing in metal bands, easycore, emo, pop punk, and hardcore before finally joining up with Trash Boat, where he has been ever since. In the beginning, I think Trash Boat was pretty inaccessible. Typically, one would follow up that sentence with,
"But I've liked them since the beginning. Inaccessibility doesn't scare me off. I like it when things sound bad."
But those early EPs, Brainwork and Look Alive, I'm just not a fan of. There are moments that I like, and I'm not writing them off completely. Songs like Cluttered Sign and Perspective are pretty solid. I just don't exactly know how to describe my feelings about these EPs. They're like smelling gasoline. Like it smells kind of good, but also makes my head hurt. Does that make any sense? And I think the main reason I don't like those early EPs is the vocal. Toby has a very unique vocal style. It's somehow high-pitched yet gruff at the same time. He manages to scream and shout without having that whiny quality that I think a band like Neck Deep had. Just based on that description, I would expect to love his voice. But in the early EPs and a lot of the first record, I just did not enjoy it. It sounded a little synthetic, underwater even. Gasoline, smells good, kills your brain cells. And there's a bit of that still. I mean, part of it is just Toby's voice. But over time, he's gotten so much more proficient at shouting and screaming, as well as adding softer and more accessible vocals with each release. Trash Boat's first album, Nothing I Write You Can Change What You've Been Through, landed with a bit of a splash. It's their first album on a large label, Hopeless Records, who at the time was chasing pop punk sound in a big way. They had landed Neck Deep and also had the Wonder Years, among many others. And who had produced that first Trash Boat album but the great Dan Campbell, the vocalist behind the Wonder Years? This was a great choice for increasing the popularity of the band and hyping up this release. I mean, when you have a band like Soupy as a feature on this album's opening song, then a ton of people are going to check it out and see what all the fuss is about. But also you get a person like Dan, who is a great vocalist, to tease out the best performance from Toby, as well as help them write songs that were out of the box at the time for Trash Boat. Without Dan, I don't see them writing songs like Strangers or Tring Quarry, and what do you know, those are the most popular songs on the record. But those two singles are anomalies in the Trash Boat catalog. That, dare I say, generic pop punk sound doesn't really show up in Trash Boat's discography, and I think that is a good thing for the most part. Those two pop punk singles were the sugar that coated the bitter pill that is the more aggressive side of Trash Boat, and the rest of the album is pretty darn heavy for a pop punk band. And I was so happy that they leaned into that for their follow-up album, Crown Shyness. Their sophomore LP would take on everything that I loved about Nothing I Write You and polish it to perfection. And real quick, liking this video is the #1 way you can support this channel right now, so if you're enjoying the video, that would mean a lot. Anyway, back to Crown Shyness. I love this album. It's riffs galore, it's aggressive, it's thoughtful. Toby figured out something on this album, like how to make his shouts and screams not sound like AI, so that was a major improvement. It's extremely well paced, the production is tight, this thing just sounds amazing. Heartbreaking moments like Old Soul and Crown Shyness are balanced with melt your face off tracks like Controlled Burn. Yes, I know that to a lot of people this album is going to be pretty tame and nothing close to melt your face off, but for me that's really how I feel about this record. It's really angry and aggressive, yet still somehow is accessible. And I am the annoying fan by my own admission who hears something like this album, Crown Shyness, where it's the case of the band doing something less accessible, less commercial than their previous album, and my gut reaction is to give them major props for it. Because when they do something that won't make them more popular, it's way easier to say something like, they're keeping their artistic integrity, they're uncompromising in their vision or whatever. But when you release something like Don't You Feel Amazing, Trash Boat's follow-up to Crown Shyness, suddenly none of that applies, and this is where I want to be very careful and examine my own gut reaction to an album like this, because I think that those statements should apply to Don't You Feel Amazing. They're still keeping their artistic integrity. They're still uncompromising in their vision. Don't You Feel Amazing sounds much bigger in every way. There's some huge rock and metal influenced production where their first two albums sound a little flat in comparison, which, don't get me wrong, I think was perfect for those records. But Don't You Feel Amazing sounds massive. There's a lot going on, there's features, there's synth. Toby sounds radio friendly some of the time. Oh, the horror. There's a ton of ideas here, which is why some of this album sounds so big, and why, admittedly, I can get on board with saying that this album is a little bloated. But are there too many ideas here? There's a lot of layers and effects. But do they work? A lot of people will say no, it doesn't work. But I want to give Trash Boat some credit here. They put a ton of passion into this project. They believe in it fiercely, they gave it their all. They made a conscious decision to not retread the same ground over and over again, which in itself is commendable. They knew that they had the option to comfortably stay in their lane of aggressive pop punk and guarantee another moderately successful release. But staying in that lane didn't sound creatively fulfilling to them, and they clearly stretched themselves to their limits here. They knew that the new sound would be divisive, but they took the chance on it anyways. But it is such a massive jump in sound from their previous work, it almost doesn't even sound like the same band. And prior to the release of this album, they only had fans who knew them for this old sound. And a big portion of that fan base is going to hate the sound of Don't You Feel Amazing. So that initial reaction to this album, where their only listeners were old fans of their work, skewed negative. But I think this album will eventually find its audience, one that maybe even prefers this new sound. I don't know the full picture, but it seems like this album is performing about as well as Crown Shyness. But because it performed about as well, it puts Trash Boat again in a prickly situation. Don't You Feel Amazing didn't launch them into the stratosphere, so there's no clear path forward. Do they play it safe and try and combine what worked in Don't You Feel Amazing with what worked in Crown Shyness? Do they double down on the Don't You Feel Amazing sound? Whatever they decide on, I'm going to give it a shot. I love Trash Boat, and I want to support them in every way I can. I got to see them live last year, picked up a signed copy of Nothing I Write You. They're a huge talent in the scene, and I'm stoked for their next release. And since the release of Don't You Feel Amazing, they have released a new single, which I really like. I think Trash Boat is onto something here. What do you want to hear from Trash Boat? I've done videos like this on Turnover and Trophy Eyes. Hopefully, I will see you over there next. Thanks for watching.